The screen door creaked as Margaret wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron, peering through the kitchen window at the black truck kicking up dust along the ranch road. She knew who it was. Everyone in Miller's Creek knew that truck belonged to James Hartwell, the man who'd inherited the sprawling Hartwell Ranch after his father passed 2 years ago. At 53, Margaret had learned to keep her head down and her expectations lower. The diner where she'd worked for 15 years had closed last month, victim to the new highway bypass that routed travelers around their small town instead of through it. Her savings were dwindling, and the classified ad she'd circled in red ink that morning felt like a last grasp at stability ranch cook needed. Room and board included. She hadn't expected him to call within the hour, or to tell her to come by that very afternoon. James Hartwell stepped out of his truck, and Margaret's breath caught despite herself. He was probably in his early 40s, with silver threading through dark hair and the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years of honest work under the sun. His eyes, she noticed as he approached the porch, were a startling blue-green, like shallow creek water catching the light. "Mrs. Patterson?" His voice was deep, cautious. "Margaret, please. And it's Miss. Never married." She pushed open the screen door, suddenly aware of how old her house dress looked, how gray had overtaken the auburn in her hair. "I appreciate you seeing me on such short notice." He nodded, removing his hat. "I appreciate you coming out. Ranch is about 12 miles from town. The isolation bothers some people." "I grew up on a farm," Margaret said. "Silence doesn't scare me." Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe, or relief. "Would you like to see the kitchen?" As they walked through the main house, Margaret tried not to gawk. The place was beautiful in a neglected way, like a garden gone wild. High ceilings with exposed beams, wide plank floors that needed polishing, furniture covered in a fine layer of dust. It was a home that had forgotten what warmth felt like. The kitchen was enormous, with a 6-burner stove, double ovens, and enough counter space to feed an army. Or a ranch full of hands, which she supposed was the point. "I have 8 men working here full-time," James explained, leaning against the doorframe. "My father used to have a cook, Mrs. Chen. She was with us for 20 years, but she retired when he died. I've been managing with frozen dinners and whatever the hands can throw together, but—" He trailed off, looking almost embarrassed. "It's not working." Margaret ran her hand along the butcher block counter, imagining it. "What time do your men start work?" 5 a.m. Then I'd have breakfast ready by 4:30. Something hot and filling. Lunch at noon, dinner at 6. That sounds... He paused, studying her with an intensity that made her skin warm. "Miss Patterson, I have to be direct. You're clearly qualified. Overqualified, probably. But I need to know you'll stay. The last 3 cooks I tried all left within a month. Said the ranch was too remote, too quiet. I can't keep disrupting the men's routine." Margaret met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm 53 years old. I've worked since I was 15, and I've never left a job without giving proper notice. I don't have family waiting for me in town, and I don't need Friday night dances or shopping malls. What I need is honest work and a place to call home." She hesitated, then added quietly, "I'm too old for games or flights of fancy. But I can cook, sir. That much I can promise you." The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "James. Call me James. And the job's yours if you want it." She started the next Monday, moving her few belongings into the small cottage behind the main house that had been Mrs. Chen's. It had a bedroom, a bathroom, and a sitting room with a potbelly stove. Simple, clean, hers. That first morning, she woke at 3:30 and made her way to the main house through darkness so complete it felt solid. By 4:15, she had biscuits in the oven, gravy simmering, eggs ready to scramble, and bacon crisping. The coffee was strong enough to resurrect the dead. The ranch hands came in quietly, surprised to find the kitchen blazing with light and warmth. They were good men, Margaret decided immediately, polite, hungry, grateful. They ate like wolves and thanked her like gentlemen. James came in last, and she noticed he'd shaved, put on a clean shirt. "Miss Patterson," he said formally, though his eyes betrayed his pleasure at the spread before him. Margaret, she corrected, sliding a plate in front of him. Miss Patterson makes me feel like a schoolmarm. Margaret, then. He took a bite of biscuit and closed his eyes. Lord, I'd forgotten what real food tastes like. She turned away to hide her smile, but warmth bloomed in her chest. The weeks fell into rhythm. Margaret discovered she loved the work, the early mornings, the satisfaction of feeding hungry men, the way the kitchen became the heart of the ranch. She baked bread on Wednesdays, made pie on Fridays, and kept a pot of soup simmering on the back burner for anyone who wandered in between meals. James was different from what she'd expected. He worked as hard as any of his hands, was first in the barn and last to leave the fields. But in the evenings, after dinner, he'd sometimes linger in the kitchen while she cleaned up. They'd talk about small things, the weather, the cattle, the land. He never pressed into her past, and she didn't pry into his. But she learned things anyway. That he'd been engaged once years ago, to a woman who'd taken one look at ranch life and fled back to Denver. That his father had been a hard man, impossible to please, and James had spent his whole life trying to measure up. That he was lonely in a way that had nothing to do with the number of people around him. One evening in early November, Margaret was rolling out pie crust when James came in through the back door, tracking mud and bringing the smell of rain. Sorry, he said quickly, seeing her look at the floor. I'll clean it. You'll sit down and let me get you coffee, she said firmly. You look half frozen. He obeyed, which surprised them both. She poured him coffee and, on impulse, added a shot of whiskey from the bottle she kept for cooking. When she set it in front of him, their fingers brushed, and Margaret felt that touch all the way to her bones. Margaret, he said slowly, wrapping his hands around the mug. Can I ask you something? Her heart stuttered. Of course. Why did you never marry? He looked up, and there was no judgment in his eyes, only genuine curiosity. I don't mean to pry, but a woman who can cook like you, who works as hard as you do. She sat down across from him, dusting flour from her hands. I almost did, once. I was 22, head over heels for a boy who promised me the moon. Turned out he was promising it to 2 other girls at the same time. She smiled at the old memory, the sting long since faded. After that, I decided I'd rather be alone than settle. I dated here and there over the years, but no one ever felt right. And then time passed, and I suppose I just got used to my own company. Sounds lonely. Sometimes, she admitted. But there are worse things than being alone. Being with the wrong person, for instance. James was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. My father used to say I was too particular. That I should have married Sandra despite. He stopped himself. Despite her not loving ranch life? Despite her not loving me, he said quietly. Not really. She loved the idea of me, maybe. The ranch, the land, what it could become. But me. He shook his head. After she left, I told myself it was easier this way. Easier to focus on the work, the land. But some nights, this house feels so empty I can hear the walls breathe. Margaret's throat tightened. James. I'm sorry. He stood abruptly. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Must be the whiskey. There was barely a teaspoon in there, she said softly. And for what it's worth, I don't think you're too particular. I think you're patient. Waiting for something real. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Margaret felt exposed in a way that should have frightened her but didn't. What if real has been here all along, he said quietly, and I've been too blind to see it? The pie crust forgotten, Margaret stood slowly. James, I'm 53 years old. You're 41. 12 years isn't so much, Margaret. It's not just the years. She gestured at herself helplessly. Look at me. I'm old enough to be. Beautiful, he interrupted, crossing the kitchen in 3 strides. Strong. The first person in 2 years who's made this house feel like a home. He stopped just inches from her, close enough that she could see the silver in his stubble, the fine lines around his eyes. I know this is sudden. I know I have no right. But I also know that for the first time since my father died, I look forward to mornings. Because you'll be in the kitchen with the light on and coffee brewing. I come in for dinner not because I'm hungry but because I'll get to see you smile." Margaret's hands trembled. "I'm too old for fairy tales, James." "Good," he said, his voice rough. "Because this isn't a fairy tale. It's just me, telling you the truth. I'm falling in love with you, Margaret Patterson. And I don't give a damn about numbers or what anyone else might think." She closed her eyes, let herself feel the warmth radiating from him, the solid reality of his presence. When she opened them again, he was still there, waiting. "I can cook," she whispered, echoing her words from that first interview. "That's all I said I could promise." "Is that still all you want to promise?" Margaret thought about her little cottage, her quiet life, the safety of solitude. Then she thought about how it felt to see James smile, to hear his laugh, to know that her presence brought him comfort. "No," she said finally, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the roughness of his jaw beneath her palm. "I think I'd like to promise more than that." When he kissed her, gentle and sure, Margaret felt something unlock in her chest, a door she'd kept bolted for 30 years, opening at last onto unexpected light. Outside, rain drummed on the roof of the old ranch house, and inside, two lonely people found their way home to each other. She was 53, and she could cook. But as it turned out, she could also love, could also be loved, could also begin again. And that was more than enough.